You won't believe this, but in the Sahara, makeup was never meant to make anyone beautiful. It hid the sun, defied the wind, and carried the weight of entire bloodlines across the skin. Every line held a rule, every color had a story, and one mistake could insult a whole tribe. What you think is decoration was for them survival and identity woven together in dust. Tonight, you will walk beside the women who turned the harshest desert on earth into a canvas of living memory. So, before you feel comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel only if your heart truly wants to. If you do like it, leave a little comment letting me know what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights. Adjust the pillow to fit your head. Maybe turn on a fan to create a relaxing atmosphere. And let's begin this journey together tonight. If someone were to stand at the threshold of the Sahara before the sun climbed over the horizon, they would feel a silence so dry it seemed to press against the skin with a quiet insistence. The air carries almost no moisture, the ground fractures in pale lines, and even the faintest wind sweeps across the surface with a sharpness that reveals how unforgiving this place truly is. Nothing in this landscape offers softness. The sun rises quickly, spreading heat across the sand before a person has fully taken their first breath of morning. There is no sense of ease here, only the steady reminder that survival begins on the surface of the body. What people do to their skin in this environment is not dictated by preference, fashion, or vanity. It is dictated by the land itself. The Sahara is among the hottest and driest regions on Earth, a place where the boundaries between day and night feel abrupt and severe. Daylight stretches across the dunes in long waves of shimmering heat, making distances distort. At night, the temperature drops with a suddenness that tightens the air around the body. The sand beneath the feet never fully cools, and yet the wind at night slices through clothing like a blade. To exist between these extremes is to understand that the environment is not passively endured. It actively shapes every movement, every decision, every moment of care for the body. The sun burns directly onto the face. It does not simply warm, it strikes. Even a short walk can leave the skin stinging. Sand lifted by sudden gusts scratches the surface like fine shards of glass. These grains move into the eyes, travel into the corners of the mouth, and cling to the skin until removed by force. Women who live here understand the consequences of exposing a bare face to these elements. The desert is not simply harsh. It is persistent, and it marks those who do not guard themselves properly. It almost feels absurd that protection becomes a kind of beauty ritual, yet beauty here is nothing more than the appearance of someone who has learned to endure. Those who imagine makeup as decoration would not recognize its purpose in the Sahara. Here, natural pigments are not tools of style, but tools of survival. Earth mixed with oil forms a layer that shields the skin from heat, dryness, and the constant abrasion of wind-blown dust. The materials are simple ground minerals, plant extracts, soot and clay, but their function is far more essential than any cosmetic used elsewhere. If one were to place this practice into modern terms, it would be closer to applying protective equipment rather than enhancing appearance. There is no illusion involved. Everything here begins with necessity. Tasks that seem ordinary in other parts of the world become body-altering experiences in the Sahara. Fetching water means long hours under direct sunlight. Herding animals means walking through areas where the wind whips the sand in low stinging curls. Preparing food outdoors means facing dust that never fully settles. The skin is exposed to these conditions every day, and even the strongest bodies cannot withstand the environment without adaptation. Women learn quickly that the face is the first to suffer. Eyes narrow against the light, lips crack, cheeks burn. They begin to understand why generations before them created these protective habits. The dryness of the desert does more than dehydrate. It erases. Moisture vanishes before it can be absorbed. Sweat offers no relief. Cleanliness is not tied to water, because water is too scarce to be used casually. Dust becomes part of daily life, and pigments become a form of resilience. The body cannot fight the desert directly, so women create small defenses in the form of layers on their skin. These layers are not meant to beautify in the conventional sense. They form boundaries between the person and the land. Beauty grows out of survival, not the other way around. Women of the Sahara do not behave as if the environment is an enemy. They treat it as a truth. This truth shapes how they walk, how they cover themselves, and how they protect their faces. They do not question whether the rituals make them look attractive. The question has no meaning here. What matters is endurance. A face protected with clay or softened with oil is a face that can withstand another day of heat, wind, and dust. A face left bare is a face that risks injury, pain, and permanent damage. I find it difficult not to feel humbled by how these women adapt with such clarity, as if survival were woven seamlessly into their routines. Those unfamiliar with the Sahara might imagine that adding layers to the skin would intensify the heat. Yet the opposite is true. Thin coatings of natural substances help even the temperature of the skin, reflecting sunlight and reducing the abrasive effect of sand. These coatings hold trace moisture and soften the impact of the wind. They form a thin barrier that stabilizes the body in conditions where nothing else remains stable. Everything temporary evaporates here: sweat, water, comfort, coolness. Only what is grounded endures. This is why beauty traditions in the Sahara cannot be separated from the climate. The rituals were shaped by necessity long before symbolism or meaning was added to them. The land carved these habits into the lives of those who stayed. People did not choose the desert, they inherited it, and so they built methods of living that over generations became part of their identity. The land decided the first layer of their traditions long before culture refined them. Here, the environment is the first teacher. It instructs without words, it corrects without pause, it shapes without intention. Faces become maps of experience lines, drawn by wind color, applied by earth strength, held together by habit. Beauty is not softness, it is survival worn into the skin. And every morning women step out into the heat with the same quiet determination, knowing the desert will not change for them, so they must change for the desert. The harshness that governs their days forms the quiet foundation of every protective mark they place on their skin. Everything revealed so far is only the surface of a deeper story shaped by heat, dust, and endurance. A more intricate layer waits just beyond the edge of this understanding. And once that layer appears, the meaning behind their choices becomes far less simple than it first seems. The practices that women in the Sahara carry on their faces begin with something far more urgent than the idea of appearance. The sunlight in this region does not simply warm the skin, it punishes it. A few minutes of exposure can leave raw patches, burning sensations, or deep dryness that lingers for days. The environment makes its intentions clear long before a person learns to interpret them. It is not beauty that shapes their rituals, but survival carefully accumulated through generations who understood how quickly the desert can harm a body left unprotected. Sunlight here arrives with directness. There is no shade across the open stretches of sand, no tall structures to soften its intensity, no landscape feature that interrupts the heat as it spreads across skin. Women working outside do not think of covering themselves as an aesthetic choice. They know that leaving the face bare is an invitation for damage. Natural pigments, earth, soot, clay, and ground minerals form a barrier against the sun's sharp gaze. These materials absorb, reflect, and shield in ways that ordinary skin cannot manage on its own. In this place, protection is instinctive. The women do not create these layers for effect. They create them because the desert leaves little room for hesitation. Natural colors used in the Sahara are not selected for brightness, beauty, or style. They are selected for how they behave under intense light. Darker pigments help diffuse glare. Earth-based substances help retain minimal moisture. Clay forms a thin armor against direct heat. Nothing in this method is accidental. It has been tested by circumstances harsher than any person would willingly endure. Women know exactly what each material does, how it sits on the skin, and how long it will last under the sun. Their knowledge is steady and unspoken, learned through daily repetition rather than formal instruction. It almost seems comical to imagine anyone calling these layers makeup in the decorative sense when each stroke is closer to a protective measure than an embellishment. The skin, once coated, behaves differently. It resists burning for longer periods. It absorbs heat more gradually. It no longer stings every time the wind shifts direction. These layers reduce the risk of sun-induced injuries, which can be severe in the Sahara. Blisters form easily. Cracking can become deep enough to bleed. Dryness can lead to infections that the desert's harshness only intensifies. Women understand that the face being constantly exposed must be treated as a vulnerable surface. The pigments become a second skin, one that interacts with the climate in a way the body alone cannot. Unlike cosmetics used elsewhere, these coatings do not wash off at the end of the day. Water is too scarce to be wasted on such things. The pigments stay on for long stretches of time, absorbing sweat, mixing with dust, and gradually forming a protective layer that shields the skin. The colors might fade, but the function remains. The purpose is never lost. If this were placed into the context of the modern world, it would resemble personal protective gear far more than any fashion routine. The idea may seem unfamiliar to those who associate beauty with softness. But here, softness is a liability the environment does not tolerate. Women move through the day knowing that each choice they make for their skin influences their ability to withstand the sun. Preparing food, gathering wood, and collecting water, these all tasks that demand hours outdoors. They cannot afford to let the environment weaken them. The pigments serve as a reminder that beauty is not merely a concept, but a necessity embedded in daily survival. There is no celebration of fragility. There is no praise of delicacy. Everything is built around resilience. The desert offers no other options. The pigments used are often simple to prepare: a handful of ground clay, a small amount of crushed plant material, oil extracted from nuts or seeds. Mixed, these substances become shields. Their simplicity does not diminish their importance. What matters is not the artistry of the application, but the outcome. The face is less vulnerable. The body is less strained. The harshness of the surroundings becomes slightly more bearable. I find it striking how these methods blur the line between necessity and ritual, forming something that looks like tradition, but functions like defense. The protective coloration also carries meaning beyond the physical. It shows that the wearer understands the land. It communicates knowledge, discipline, and adaptation. In a place where survival depends on familiarity with the environment, the way a woman shields her skin becomes a quiet declaration of experience. Those who have lived long in the desert know how to read these signs. They can see the choices in the colors, the thickness of the coatings, and the combination of earth and oil. The face becomes a record of one's relationship with the land. What might seem like decoration to outsiders is in reality a deeply practical response to the relentless conditions of the Sahara. There is no room for frivolity in this environment. A misplaced layer, a gap left unprotected, a moment of carelessness, any of these could lead to days of discomfort or injury. Women learn to apply pigments with precision, not for artistic effect, but for efficiency. Their hands move with practiced familiarity, placing each stroke where it will protect best. This is why describing Sahara face practices as makeup misses the point entirely. It reduces a survival strategy into a superficial aesthetic decision. But in the desert, the face is the first surface of vulnerability and the first line of defense. Every mark has a purpose. Every color has meaning. Every layer has history. These women do not beautify themselves to please the eye. They prepare themselves to withstand a land that gives nothing freely. What lies on their skin is not decoration but endurance shaped into form. Everything observed here hints at an even deeper logic behind their routines, formed through the constant pressure of heat, dryness, and sun. Another dimension of meaning emerges when one looks past the protective surface, and somewhere within that deeper layer, the line between survival and identity begins to blur. The materials women use on their faces in the Sahara come entirely from the land around them, shaped not by industry, but by necessity. The desert provides little, yet everything it offers must be understood carefully. Red earth, taken from shallow layers of soil, is one of the most common substances. Its color is dense and warm, and when mixed with oil, it becomes a paste that clings to the skin. The tone does not fade quickly under the sun, and the texture grips the surface firmly enough to resist wind. Nearby ashes from burned plants offer a softer, lighter powder. Ash spreads thinly, forming a layer that reflects sunlight without adding weight. These two materials alone form a kind of desert palette, one that has nothing to do with embellishment and everything to do with endurance. Charcoal is another tool created from the remains of burned wood. When crushed, it becomes a deep black pigment that absorbs glare and reduces the sharpness of reflected light. Women apply it around the eyes where the sun is most punishing. It darkens the contours of the face in ways that increase protection. The effectiveness of charcoal is well known among those who work outdoors each day. There is nothing decorative about its use. It is a shield that has been passed from one generation to another, learned through long hours beneath an unrelenting sun. It is almost amusing to think that something viewed elsewhere as a cosmetic flourish is in this place simply a practical response to the desert's hostility. Plants also contribute to these mixtures, though the Sahara offers few that can be harvested easily. Certain leaves, when crushed and dried, produce powders that cling lightly to the skin. Others contain natural oils that help bind earth or charcoal, forming a smoother application. Women spend years learning which plants are useful and which are dangerous. The knowledge is not written in any formal manner. It is observed, repeated, and remembered. Families pass down techniques like inheritance, ensuring that each new generation knows how to extract color from the land without harming themselves or wasting precious resources. What makes these materials remarkable is not their simplicity, but their reliability. In a climate where nothing remains stable for long, these natural substances endure. They do not melt under heat, they do not evaporate, and they do not crumble when mixed properly. Unlike industrial cosmetics that require manufacturing preservatives and packaging, desert pigments require only time, patience, and familiarity with the environment. Women grind earth between stones, sift ashes with their hands, and test mixtures against their own skin. The process is slow, deliberate, and rooted in survival rather than aesthetics. There is no reliance on anything imported or purchased. The idea of buying cosmetic products has little relevance in a place where resources are scarce and priorities are sharply defined. Women use what the land gives them, not because they prefer simplicity, but because it is the only method that aligns with the demands of their environment. If someone were to compare this to modern habits, it would resemble a form of self-made protective gear rather than a beauty routine. Each mixture is crafted with intention, and each pigment serves a specific role in shielding the body from the elements. Soot from cooking fires is another resource, collected carefully after meals. Its fine texture allows it to blend smoothly with other materials. Mixed with oil, it forms a darker paste used for stronger protection. Combined with clay, it creates a muted tone that spreads evenly across the face. Such combinations are common, and women experiment based on season, weather, and personal experience. Their methods might seem rudimentary to outsiders, yet they are grounded in deep observation of the land. The desert teaches them through consequence. When a mixture works, the skin remains intact. When it fails, the burn leaves a memory. The act of creating these pigments is itself a reflection of resilience. Women gather around simple grinding stones and work slowly, reducing minerals into powders. They discuss texture, color, and consistency, not in artistic terms, but in practical ones. This knowledge binds communities together, allowing survival to be shared rather than faced alone. I find it deeply grounding to see how these materials represent a quiet connection between people and the land formed not through abundance, but through struggle. The natural palette of the Sahara is limited, yet its effects are profound. Red earth ash, charcoal, crushed plants, each contributes to a system designed to protect. Nothing is wasted, nothing is taken lightly. These pigments form a living archive of adaptation. While the rest of the world may view cosmetics as a matter of choice or identity, here they are born from the soil itself. They carry the weight of survival shaped by the same forces that sculpt the dunes and erode the rock. Women who prepare these mixtures understand that every shade serves a purpose. The desert is not a place that allows excess. It allows only what works. These materials endure not because they beautify, but because they protect. They remain as constant as the harshness of the land, anchoring each day in the knowledge that survival begins with the simplest things: earth, ash, charcoal, oil, and the steady hands that turn them into shields. What they gather from the land forms a quiet foundation that keeps their faces safe beneath a punishing sky. A deeper significance emerges when these materials blend into tradition rather than simple utility. Once that shift becomes visible, the boundary between protection and identity reveals itself in a far more complicated way. Lip color in the Sahara is not created from manufactured pigments, crushed flowers, or refined waxes. It comes directly from the ground in the form of red earth that is heated ground and shaped into a material that adheres to the skin with surprising resilience. In some communities, women place small lumps of dried earth into warm oil, letting it soften before pressing the mixture across their lips. The color is muted but firm, creating a layer that protects the surface rather than emphasizing it. The heat of the desert does not melt it, and the dryness does not crack it easily. What might look like ornamentation to an outsider is in reality a method born from the simple truth that the environment demands protection, even in places where one might expect softness. Red earth is chosen not because it is striking, but because it behaves predictably under the punishing sun. Once applied, it forms a subtle shield that prevents the lips from burning, splitting, or drying so deeply that they bleed. The Sahara is not gentle with delicate areas of the skin. The lips, being thin and sensitive, suffer quickly when exposed. Coating them with earth becomes a quiet adaptation, one repeated day after day without ceremony. Women learn the exact texture needed: too coarse and it scratches, too fine and it falls away with the wind. The perfect consistency lies somewhere in between, found only through practice and experience. The use of earth as lip color is not considered glamorous. There is no attempt to reshape the mouth or exaggerate its features. Instead, the goal is to preserve function, the ability to speak without pain, to drink water without reopening cracks, to smile without flinching. It almost feels darkly humorous that something so basic is treated elsewhere as an artistic flourish, while here it is simply a guard against suffering. Each stroke of red earth is a step toward making the day more bearable, not more beautiful. Within certain groups, this lip color carries meanings beyond survival. The shade and thickness of application can suggest age, marital status, or social role. Some communities reserve specific tones for particular ceremonies. Others use the color as a subtle marker of belonging. The desert does not permit excess, so even symbolic choices must be tied to practicality. The line between tradition and necessity is thin, and the meaning shifts depending on who applies the pigment and why. Observers unfamiliar with this world often misunderstand what they see. A woman with earth-tinted lips may be assumed to be adorning herself for aesthetic reasons, yet she may simply be preparing for the harshness of the day. The distinction does not matter to the desert, but it matters among the people who live there. They know that the pigments protect them, but they also know that these pigments connect them to those who came before. If someone were to place this practice into a modern setting, it would be closer to wearing protective equipment than to using lipstick. This comparison does not diminish the cultural value. It clarifies the conditions that shaped it. The process of preparing the earth is as important as applying it. Women collect soil from specific locations known for their color and stability. Not all red earth behaves the same way. Some crumble too easily. Others contain impurities that irritate the skin. The soil must be sifted, washed with minimal water, and dried again before it is heated into a stable form. This work is slow and done by hand, often passed down as knowledge within families. Every step reinforces the relationship between the people and the land that both challenges and sustains them. Tradition grows out of repetition. Over time, the protective role of the pigment intertwines with cultural identity. Women begin to associate certain colors with lineage, certain textures with memories, and certain mixtures with particular ceremonies. A daughter learns to recognize the shade worn by her mother, just as the mother once recognized it from her grandmother. What began as survival becomes a symbol, but it never loses its practical function. The desert prevents such transformations from drifting too far into abstraction. The red pigments used on the lips often resemble clay when dry. They form a surface that does not crack easily under the sun, allowing women to carry on with their tasks, walking long distances, preparing food, caring for animals without constant discomfort. These pigments stay in place for hours, sometimes days, depending on how they were mixed. The durability is not accidental. It is the product of generations who experimented under harsh conditions until they discovered what worked best. In the Sahara, nothing that touches the skin is without meaning or purpose. The red earth on the lips tells a story of adaptation, resilience, and heritage. I find it deeply grounding to see how something so seemingly small carries such weight, both practical and symbolic, in a place where the land leaves no room for luxury. A single layer of pigment becomes a bridge between survival and tradition, one that remains visible with every movement of the mouth. The desert shapes this practice at every level. It determines the materials, the method, the meaning, and the endurance of the pigment. Women here do not choose lip color from a desire to embellish themselves. They choose it because the earth offers the only reliable protection, and because tradition transforms a necessity into a recognizable marker of identity. The mixture of function and symbolism creates an expression that cannot be separated from the land. The simplicity of the pigment hides the long history of survival that shaped it. A deeper understanding appears when one looks past the surface and sees how each layer connects body and land. When that connection becomes clear, the practice reveals itself as far more complex than it first seems. Color on the face carries meaning in the Sahara long before any spoken explanation is offered. Each shade, each line, each placement of pigment reflects a part of a woman's identity that the community understands instinctively. The desert shapes not only the materials, but also the messages carried by those materials. Eyes darkened with charcoal may indicate maturity or readiness for certain responsibilities. A mark across the forehead might represent a family line or a specific ancestral connection. The pigments used on the lips can shift in tone to signal marriage, widowhood, or youth. Nothing is random, and nothing is applied without awareness of how it will be read. These colors form a system of communication that has developed through centuries of shared experience. In a place where daily life leaves little room for unnecessary words, visual signals become essential. The environment itself encourages directness. Harsh winds do not wait for explanations, and the sun does not allow for long conversations. People learn to read each other quickly, interpreting marks that are as familiar to them as the shifting patterns in the sand. It almost feels strangely ironic that such a silent landscape has given rise to a language built entirely on visibility rather than sound. Different families maintain specific designs passed down through generations. One may use a horizontal streak across the cheekbone, while another favors a small cluster of dots near the temple. These marks are not decorative, they are identifiers. They carry the weight of ancestry, belonging, and the expectations of one's lineage. When two people meet, they can often recognize whether the other belongs to a related group simply by noting the pigments on the skin. Tribal distinctions that outsiders might miss are immediately clear to those who live in the desert. Marriage introduces another layer of meaning. Certain colors become appropriate only after specific rites of passage. Newly married women may wear earth tones in particular combinations, while elders use darker pigments to indicate experience and authority. Younger girls might apply lighter shades that symbolize growth or learning. These choices are not left to preference. They are taught slowly as daughters observe their mothers and grandmothers preparing themselves each day. If someone were to compare this system to anything modern, it would resemble a set of social codes expressed through appearance rather than spoken rules. It is not a perfect comparison, but it offers a glimpse of how the community relies on visual language to function. Patterns across the forehead often record older stories, moments when a family survived hardship or traveled across long distances. Some symbols are worn only during ceremonial gatherings, while others remain visible throughout daily life. The forehead becomes a space for memory, the cheeks for identity, the lips for status. Together, these areas create a map of belonging. Outsiders might see only shapes or colors, but those who live in the Sahara understand the depth behind each decision. The community reads these pigments almost unconsciously. A darker shade around the eyes conveys resilience. A particular arrangement of lines above the brow marks a woman who belongs to a respected lineage. A dot placed near the nose may indicate that she has entered a new stage in her life. These meanings form a shared understanding that allows people to move through social spaces with clarity. In a land where survival requires cooperation, knowing who someone is at a glance can matter as much as knowing the weather. Charcoal, red, earth, ash, and plant dyes all take on symbolic roles depending on where they appear. A color used for protection during travel might take on ceremonial meaning when placed differently. The same pigment can carry multiple associations, shaped by context and tradition. Women learn these distinctions gradually, through observation rather than instruction. Knowledge settles into them over time, becoming part of the rhythm of daily life. I find it deeply revealing that such a simple palette is capable of expressing so many layers of social understanding. These visual codes do not exist in isolation. They interact with the land itself. The desert's vast openness amplifies the effect of color. Against the muted tones of sand and sky, even a faint streak of pigment stands out clearly. Distance does not blur these marks. Sunlight enhances them. The desert becomes a stage where identity is always visible, where privacy is rare, and where community depends on constant recognition. Color becomes a form of presence, a way to say, I am here, and this is who I am without speaking. Over time, these traditions evolve subtly, but remain rooted in survival and social cohesion. They remind people of where they come from, who they belong to, and how they are connected to the larger group. Changes are slow, often spanning generations. No single woman decides the meaning of a color. The meaning emerges through repetition, memory, and the steady pressure of life in an environment that allows few mistakes. What seems simple to an outsider is, in truth, a complex language shaped by necessity and refined by culture. Each mark carries a story, and each story reinforces the bonds that keep the community stable. Color on the skin is not an accessory. It is identity made visible. These markings reflect a quiet order that binds people together under the desert's severe conditions. A closer look reveals how meaning rests not in the pigment itself, but in the shared history behind each shade. As that history comes into focus, the full weight of their traditions takes on a depth that is not easily forgotten. The act of applying pigments in the Sahara often extends far beyond the individual. It is not merely a woman sitting alone with a handful of earth and charcoal. In many communities, the process becomes a shared ritual, one that gathers women together in the early hours of the day or in the quiet moments before evening settles. They sit in circles on woven mats, passing materials between them, each knowing exactly how the others prefer to prepare their mixtures. The atmosphere is steady and unhurried, shaped by the same patience required for life in the desert. In this setting, face painting becomes less about appearance and more about connection. Generations of women participate in these practices. Older women instruct without speaking directly, allowing younger ones to observe the rhythm of preparation. Crushing pigments between stones, mixing them with oil, adjusting texture by feel rather than measurement. Nothing about the process is formal, yet everything is structured by experience. The gestures repeat, with soft familiarity, building a sense of unity among the group. What may look simple from a distance carries the weight of tradition passed through countless hands. Music often accompanies these gatherings. Not instruments, those are rare and fragile in such a harsh landscape, but the human voice. Women hum melodies or recite lines that they have heard since childhood. These sounds create a sense of continuity, tying the present to the past. The pigments become part of this continuity. As they are mixed and applied, they reflect both survival and memory. It is almost darkly amusing that something viewed elsewhere as a beauty routine becomes here a reminder that community is built from repetition rather than novelty. Stories are another element woven into these rituals. Women share accounts of their families, the challenges of the season, or experiences from long journeys across the dunes. The desert is vast, and its silence can be overwhelming, so these gatherings serve as a counterbalance. Speaking while preparing pigments lets the women carry emotional burdens together, just as they share the weight of survival. Some stories are old and preserved carefully. Others form spontaneously from daily life. All of them reinforce the sense of belonging that makes these rituals meaningful. Participation in these gatherings is not optional. It is understood as part of one's place in the community. Young girls join early, sitting quietly at their mothers' sides, absorbing the details. Over time, they begin assisting more directly, sifting ash, grinding clay, or distributing oil. Their involvement becomes a gradual initiation into the world of adulthood. If one were to compare this to anything modern, it might resemble a communal workshop rather than a private grooming session. The focus is on learning, observing, and participating, not on personal expression. Ceremonies deepen these connections even further. Weddings, births, seasonal transitions, and communal celebrations all include specific forms of face painting. Each event carries its own patterns, colors, and methods of application. Women may work for hours preparing pigments in precise combinations, ensuring that the marks on each participant carry the proper meaning. These rituals do not require elaborate tools or rare materials. Their significance lies in the shared effort and the unspoken understanding that tradition is preserved through collective practice. During ceremonial painting, each woman's face becomes a record of the community's history. Designs used only in specific moments appear with deliberate placement. The markings might represent blessings, protection, or remembrance. They might honor ancestors or signal transitions from one stage of life to another. Outsiders might not recognize the subtle differences, but to those who participate, each variation carries a clear and deeply rooted significance. The act of painting itself strengthens bonds. Women apply pigments to one another's faces with slow, careful movements. The trust required for this is substantial. Letting someone touch your face in an environment where protection is essential signifies respect and closeness. The gestures create a brief stillness, a moment in which survival is no longer a solitary effort but a shared one. I find it striking that these rituals reveal community not through grand displays, but through small, steady acts of care repeated across generations. These gatherings are also moments where knowledge is preserved. The exact mixtures used for certain events, the meanings behind specific patterns, and the order of application are not written down anywhere. They exist only in memory. Women ensure that these memories remain alive by practicing them together. A ritual performed alone might fade with time, but one performed collectively survives. The desert's harshness teaches them that anything fragile must be reinforced by many hands. In this way, face painting becomes both a survival technique and a cultural anchor. It protects the skin from the environment, while protecting the community from forgetting itself. The pigments on the skin are not just physical shields, but reminders that identity does not belong to one person alone. It is shaped, maintained, and carried forward by the group. The desert might erase footprints within minutes, but these rituals carve enduring marks into the lives of those who practice them. The rituals surrounding these pigments reveal how survival and tradition weave together in a landscape that offers little comfort. A closer look shows that meaning grows through the shared actions rather than the materials themselves. When those actions are viewed across generations, the boundary between daily necessity and cultural identity becomes increasingly difficult to separate. In many Sahara communities, the materials used for face painting belong solely to women existing within a private sphere that men are not permitted to enter. This boundary is not enforced through loud rules or visible barriers. It exists quietly, shaped by generations of understanding about who holds responsibility for certain aspects of life. The pigments, tools, and mixtures rest in containers that women keep close, passed from mother to daughter, with the same care given to items of personal memory. To touch these materials without permission would be more than a breach of etiquette. It would be a disruption of a structure that the community depends on. The face is not merely a surface in the Sahara. It is a symbol of identity, history, and resilience, shaped by the marks a woman chooses and the knowledge she carries. Because of this, the right to alter or prepare the face belongs only to the woman herself or to the women within her circle. Men understand this division intuitively. They do not question it, and they do not attempt to cross it. They know that the pigments do more than protect the skin. They communicate a status that only women can interpret and maintain. It is almost quietly humorous that in a landscape dominated by physical hardship, the boundary most firmly respected is one made of earth and ash. The sacredness of these materials is rooted not in mysticism, but in responsibility. Women are the ones who understand how each pigment behaves, how clay must be ground, how charcoal must be mixed, how oil must be balanced to prevent cracking under the sun. These details shape the daily survival of the entire household. A woman who applies her pigments correctly can endure long hours outdoors, bringing stability to her family's routine. A woman whose face is unprotected suffers, and her suffering affects everyone around her. The pigments therefore become extensions of her agency, tools she controls fully, because the consequences fall upon her more than anyone else. Men keep their distance for another reason. The face is seen as an intimate representation of one's inner self. Touching a woman's pigments means touching the physical boundary she constructs between herself and the desert. To intrude upon that boundary is to violate something held deeply personal. If someone were to look for a modern comparison, it would resemble the way people today guard certain private belongings that represent identity rather than utility. The comparison is imperfect, but it shows how meaning can be tied to an object that outsiders may view as simple. The containers holding these pigments are rarely elaborate. Some are made from animal hide, others from woven fibers, and others simply from smooth stones hollowed over time. Their simplicity does not lessen their importance. Women know who these belong to and who has the right to open them. These objects travel with them across dunes, through seasons, and into major life transitions. They hold the materials that shield their bodies and express their belonging. Men may carry weapons or tools, but pigments remain beyond their reach. In communal gatherings, women place their pigment containers together in a small circle. They sit close, sharing tools and knowledge, while men remain at a respectful distance. This arrangement is not spoken about. It simply forms, naturally guided by long-standing understanding. Girls absorb this boundary early in life. They watch how their mothers position their pigments, and how men step around them without comment. Over time, the boundary becomes part of the rhythm of life, not enforced through fear, but through quiet agreement. The idea that only the woman herself may alter her face is tied to the belief that personal identity should not be reshaped by another person's will. The marks she chooses to wear reflect her social role, her heritage, her level of experience, and her stage of life. If a man were allowed to apply these pigments, or even handle them carelessly, he would interrupt a system built on autonomy. The desert already strips people of control in many areas. This is one space where women maintain absolute authority. I find it deeply striking that this authority remains intact, even in environments where physical survival often dominates every decision. Some women, allow close female relatives to help them apply pigments, especially during ceremonies or moments of transition. But even then, the involvement comes with trust. No one can decide a woman's markings for her. They can assist, but they cannot choose. The decision of what to wear on the face is seen as an expression of internal conviction, shaped by understanding rather than pressure. When a girl reaches the age where she chooses her own pigments, it is considered a step into adulthood. Her first independent markings are remembered by those around her, not because of their beauty, but because of what they signify. Men do not feel excluded from this sphere. They view it as a natural division of experience, just as they carry responsibilities women do not share. They know that touching a woman's pigments would be comparable to interfering with her personal decisions, and such interference holds no place in their world. They stand back, not out of fear, but out of respect for a system that ensures stability. In the Sahara, where survival relies on cooperation and clarity, these boundaries prevent conflict and preserve identity. The pigments remain safe in the hands of women, shaping faces that endure sun, wind, and time with steady determination. To touch them without permission would be to touch the very core of what gives women strength in this environment. This quiet division reveals a balance that keeps the community steady under harsh conditions. A closer look shows that the rule is not about restriction, but about protecting a woman's right to define herself. Once that balance is recognized, the deeper significance of their customs takes on a weight that extends far beyond the pigments themselves. Across the Sahara, facial markings carry meanings that reach far beyond their simple appearance. Each line dot or curved shape holds a specific purpose, shaped over generations, turning the skin into a surface where identity is recorded with care. Women learn early that these markings are not optional and not decorative. A single misplaced stroke can alter the message carried on the face, shifting how others read status, lineage, or social position. The desert itself may erase footprints within minutes, yet a small mark on the skin can leave a lasting impression sometimes, one that is deeply unwelcome. Every tribe maintains its own system of visual communication. Lines near the eyes may indicate marriage, while shapes across the forehead might echo ancestry. Small markings near the mouth can reveal whether someone has reached a particular stage in life. Outsiders often see complexity without understanding, but for those who belong to the culture, the meanings are unmistakable. These patterns form a vocabulary of survival, allowing members of a group to identify allies, travelers, or strangers at a glance. It is almost grimly humorous that a vast and unforgiving landscape depends on distinctions so fine they can be thrown off by a single uneven line. Because the markings function as a form of communication, accuracy becomes essential. A misplaced symbol can suggest a role that does not belong to the wearer. A design reserved for a different tribe can be interpreted as disrespect or imitation. Even slight variations in spacing or angle may create confusion within the community. Women therefore practice their markings with deliberate repetition, guided by older relatives who correct them quietly and precisely. The act resembles learning a written script rather than preparing decoration. The face becomes a message, and each stroke must be placed with intention. Among certain groups, markings differ only subtly from one family line to another. A narrow shift in direction, a shortened curve, or an added dot may signal an entirely different meaning. The precision required reflects the value placed on lineage and identity. If someone looked for a modern example, it might resemble insignias that appear similar, but determine rank or status with absolute clarity. To misapply such a symbol is to risk presenting oneself as something one is not, and the consequences extend far beyond embarrassment. Social reaction to incorrect markings does not typically erupt into open conflict. Instead, the error reshapes interactions in subtle ways. A woman wearing symbols associated with marriage might receive greetings meant for someone older. A girl marked with designs belonging to a ceremonial role might be treated with undue deference. These moments expose how deeply markings guide daily life. They also show how fragile identity becomes when meaning relies on such delicate visual cues. Teaching young girls to avoid these mistakes becomes a slow and patient process. They watch older women prepare pigments and practice strokes on small pieces of leather or flat stones. They learn to judge spacing by eye, to adjust thickness with pressure, and to repeat each design until the rhythm becomes instinctive. A misaligned dot or reversed line earns correction not through harsh words, but through steady instruction. The system protects them from misunderstandings that could follow them into adulthood. Ceremonial markings heighten the consequences of error. Weddings, births, and transitional rites require symbols used only on specific occasions. Only certain women are permitted to apply them, chosen for their steady hands and deep understanding of meaning. A misplaced ceremonial sign disrupts more than appearance. It interrupts the ritual's order. Women preparing these designs move slowly, speaking little aware that their precision carries spiritual and social significance. Travel between tribes introduces new challenges. A marking, considered harmless in one region, may evoke tension in another. Women sometimes adjust their patterns before crossing into unfamiliar territory, choosing neutral designs that neither offend nor miscommunicate. This adaptability shows how deeply embedded the system is in social survival. The desert may punish the unprepared, but misunderstandings between people can be just as dangerous. Despite the strictness surrounding these markings, women take pride in them. Each precise stroke becomes evidence of knowledge passed through generations. The ability to mark one's face correctly is both a responsibility and an honor. It ties individuals to their ancestors and affirms their belonging within the community. I find it striking that such delicate symbols can carry so much cultural weight in an environment shaped by wind, scarcity, and constant exposure. The desert's own nature reinforces the value of precision. People who live among shifting sands, unpredictable winds, and sharp heat learn to interpret subtle signs to survive. Facial markings become extensions of this awareness. They are not simply cultural expressions. They are navigational tools guiding interactions, relationships, and alliances. A correct marking provides clarity. An incorrect one invites uncertainty. Over time, these symbols have become threads holding the community together. Each mark repeats something from the past, shaping continuity, even as circumstances change. The severity with which mistakes are viewed is not rooted in vanity, but in the need for stability. Identity must remain readable in a place where everything else can be swallowed by sand within moments. These markings show how vulnerable identity becomes when meaning depends on strokes so small. A closer look reveals that a single misplaced line can shift how a person is understood. The moment this reality settles in, the seriousness behind each mark gains a clarity that is difficult to ignore. Among many Sahara communities, dark skin stands as the clearest symbol of beauty, shaped directly by the desert's harsh demands. Under an unfiltered sun, the skin must endure heat that rises without mercy, winds that scrape the surface like coarse sandpaper, and air so dry it steals moisture from anything left exposed. In such an environment, the qualities admired most are resilience, strength, and the ability to withstand what the land imposes. Pale or fragile skin cannot survive these conditions, and over time, the people have learned to value what endures. Beauty, therefore, is not an imported notion, but something carved from the necessities of daily life. Women do not attempt to lighten their complexion, nor do they aspire to a standard born elsewhere. Instead, they use pigments and oils to emphasize the depth and richness of their natural tones. A subtle sheen created by carefully applied mixtures gives the skin a strength that is both practical and aesthetic. Red earth pressed into the cheeks adds warmth. Charcoal blended lightly around the eyes reduces glare while sharpening expression. Oils smooth the surface so that it does not crack under the heat. It is almost darkly amusing that in a world obsessed elsewhere with maintaining paleness, the desert chooses its own terms and crowns endurance as beauty. The admiration for dark skin emerges not from preference alone, but from observation. Generations have watched how the sun, wind, and dryness affect the body. Those who adapt remain strong. Those who do not struggle constantly. Dark skin resists burning, retains moisture longer, and reflects an ability to move confidently through the landscape without fear of physical damage. A woman who carries this resilience on her skin shows competence and preparedness qualities essential for survival in a place where the environment never softens. Her complexion becomes a quiet proclamation of capability. Pigments are not used to hide imperfections. They are used to highlight what the desert itself has sculpted. Oils form protective barriers, creating a reflective layer that announces vitality. Clay powders settle into the contours of the face, emphasizing depth rather than concealing it. Charcoal frames the eyes, shielding them and adding definition. These materials do not transform the skin, they respect it. If someone sought a modern parallel, it might resemble a culture where the function of skincare outweighs the desire for cosmetic alteration. Even so, the comparison falls short, because the meaning here is rooted in survival, not preference. Women learn to care for their skin from a young age. They observe how elders apply oils at specific times of day, mix pigments according to season, and adjust routines when the winds shift direction. They learn to recognize subtle signs of strain, dry patches, cracks, thinning texture, and to respond quickly, knowing that neglect can lead to pain and vulnerability. Their routines become acts of responsibility, not vanity. The desert requires constant awareness, and the skin communicates its needs with a clarity honed through generations. Dark skin also creates an ideal canvas for traditional markings. Symbols applied with clay, charcoal, or ash stand out more vividly, allowing meanings to be read easily by members of the community. These markings can indicate marital status, origin, age, or ceremonial role. On a darker surface, each line appears deliberate, each dot purposeful. This clarity strengthens social communication, letting others understand a woman's identity at a glance. Markings and complexion work together, forming a visual language that is both beautiful and functional. Children internalize these values early. They watch the admiration directed toward women whose skin remains strong even during the hottest months. They hear elders describe the importance of maintaining the body's natural defenses. Girls begin practicing skincare long before they adopt facial markings, understanding that the foundation of beauty is the ability to withstand the environment. Boys learn to associate dark skin with wisdom and capability. These perceptions become woven into the structure of community life. Outsiders often misinterpret these aesthetics, assuming that dark skin is simply accepted rather than revered. But the desert shapes perception differently. Lightness does not symbolize purity or refinement here. It symbolizes fragility. The people whose skin grows deeper under the sun embody strength and adaptation. These qualities become inseparable from beauty. The desert erases what cannot endure, and so the community admires what survives. Generations have upheld these values without bending to foreign ideals. Beauty in the Sahara does not shift according to fashion media or external influence. It remains tied to the land itself. Dark skin reflects loyalty to ancestry, alignment with the environment, and the wisdom of adaptation. Women carry this truth calmly, knowing that their appearance is not judged against unreachable standards, but measured by how well it harmonizes with the place they call home. I find it deeply striking that in such severe conditions, beauty emerges not from escape, but from full acceptance of the desert's demands. The relationship between skin and environment extends into cultural identity. Each generation inherits not only features, but also knowledge how to protect the body, how to read signs of strain, and how to build strength that the desert recognizes. The admiration for dark skin becomes admiration for survival, continuity, and groundedness. It reveals a worldview shaped by wind and heat, rather than by distant expectations. This understanding of beauty shows how identity forms through endurance rather than ornament. A closer look reveals that the desert rewards what can withstand its force, reshaping perception accordingly. The realization of this relationship casts their admiration for dark skin in a clarity that leaves little room for misunderstanding. Among Sahara communities, mirrors are unnecessary tools. The act of painting the face does not depend on reflection, but on memory, repetition, and the quiet discipline passed through generations. Women learn to trust their hands long before they trust their eyes. They know the distance between cheek and temple by instinct, the angle of a traditional line by feel alone, and the weight of a pattern through countless hours of practice. This familiarity grows gradually, built from early childhood into adulthood, until every movement becomes steady and unhesitating. The face turns into a landscape mapped entirely by touch. Girls begin by watching their mothers and grandmothers prepare pigments, observing how they measure portions not by units but by pressure, texture, and the subtle shift of color under the fingers. They do not ask for guidance. They learn by imitation, echoing the gestures they see repeated daily. When they reach the age to paint their own faces, they do so without hesitation, placing lines precisely where tradition requires them. It is almost quietly humorous that in an age where people elsewhere depend on bright lights and polished glass, women of the desert create flawless designs with nothing more than memory and a steady hand. The absence of mirrors does not limit their accuracy. Instead, it refines it. Women develop an intimate understanding of their own facial structure, where the skin dips, where bone rises, and where pigments settle most effectively. They know the warmth of their skin under different temperatures, the way clay textures vary with humidity, and how oil spreads differently across each area. These details form a tactile map, a sensory guide that allows them to paint with remarkable precision. Tradition supports this skill. Each pattern has a designated place, meaning, and scale. The symbols do not vary wildly. They stay consistent through generations, giving structure to the practice. Girls memorize these designs long before they ever apply them. They trace them in sand, etch them on stones, practice them on small pieces of hide. After years of repetition, the patterns become instinctive. If someone sought a modern comparison, it might resemble a musician who no longer reads notes, but plays from a deep internal familiarity. Skill transitions from conscious effort to ingrained understanding. In group settings, women sometimes paint one another's faces, but even then, mirrors are rarely used. They rely on communication through touch, steadying a chin, aligning a jaw, and guiding the placement of a line with deliberate pressure. The process becomes an exchange rooted in trust. They do not need reflection to confirm accuracy. They read the surface of the skin directly through their fingertips. The gesture itself becomes as significant as the final result. This method also creates consistency across generations. A young girl learns from the tactile habits of her elders, adopting not only the patterns, but the rhythm of their movements. These habits form a lineage of technique. Even without written instructions or visual references, the designs remain remarkably stable over time. The continuity reveals how deeply the skill is embedded in daily life, shaped by necessity rather than ornamentation. The desert demands practicality, and so reflecting surfaces have never become essential objects. Yet the precision achieved without mirrors is not simply physical. It reflects an internal alignment with tradition. Women know the meanings behind each symbol they place. They understand which markings honor ancestors, which designate social roles, and which protect against extreme sun or ceremonial expectations. This awareness guides their hands with a clarity that no mirror could provide. The face becomes not a canvas for creativity, but a space where memory, identity, and responsibility converge. I find it striking that the absence of a mirror does not diminish their accuracy, but strengthens the connection between intention and gesture. During ceremonies, the level of precision increases even further. Women who take on the role of applying markings for others must maintain absolute steadiness. They learn to judge angles by observing posture, to measure distances through practiced estimations, and to maintain symmetry using their sense of balance rather than their sight alone. The results, despite lacking visual confirmation, often appear more consistent than designs executed with reflective assistance elsewhere. The reliance on memory and touch also reinforces confidence. Women know their abilities intimately. They do not question whether their markings are correct. They trust the traditions that shape their technique. The desert teaches them to rely on their senses in all aspects of life, reading the wind by ear, assessing the heat by skin, gauging distance through instinct. Face painting becomes another reflection of this embodied knowledge. This method of painting also reveals something deeper about their worldview. Accuracy comes not from constant self-observation, but from integration into community practices. No one stands alone inspecting her reflection. Instead, identity forms through participation in shared rituals, through gestures repeated and witnessed, through markings recognized by others. Beauty and meaning arise collectively rather than individually. As a result, the final appearance carries the weight not of perfectionism, but of continuity. Women look as their mothers looked, their grandmothers before them, and the generations stretching back across time. The skill does not exist to impress, but to endure, aligned with the patterns the desert has shaped in both land and people. These markings reveal how memory and touch create a precision that reflection cannot match. A closer look shows that tradition itself becomes the guiding surface when mirrors are absent. Once this becomes clear, the calm confidence behind their movements gains an unmistakable significance. Among Sahara communities, painted faces are not temporary creations meant to vanish with the evening. The pigments they use are prepared to last, to withstand heat, dryness, and the long stretches of time when water cannot be spared. A woman's markings often remain on her skin for several days, sometimes longer, unchanged, except by the slow rhythm of the desert itself. This endurance reflects a different understanding of appearance, one shaped not by fleeting trends or daily routines, but by a landscape that rarely allows for such luxuries. The result is a form of beauty that stays with the wearer, becoming part of her movements, her work, and her presence, long after the moment of application has passed. Water is a precious resource in the desert, measured carefully and used sparingly. Washing the face thoroughly every day would be considered wasteful, even impractical for most families. Instead, women rely on oils, clay mixtures, and natural waxes to keep their markings intact. These substances bind pigments to the skin, protecting them from wind and sand while preserving their color. It is almost quietly humorous that in places where others speak of daily cleansing routines, these women maintain their painted faces through seasons of heat, with nothing but patience and a handful of natural materials. The longevity of their markings is not an accident. Women apply pigments with deliberate intention, placing each layer so that it fuses with the natural texture of their skin. Oils soften the surface, allowing the pigments to grip. Clay anchors the color. Wax seals everything against the air. Over time, the layers settle into a stable form that resists fading. Renewal does not happen through removal, but through reinforcement, adding small amounts when needed, rather than wiping everything away. This approach shapes how beauty is perceived. A face marked for days communicates consistency and discipline, not neglect. The durability reflects how deeply the markings belong to daily life, rather than momentary enhancement. If someone sought a modern parallel, it might resemble permanent or semi-permanent cosmetics. Except here, the intent is not convenience, but survival and continuity. The markings must remain in place because they serve purposes far beyond aesthetics, social identification, protection from the sun, and participation in cultural rituals. Women learn early how to maintain these long-lasting layers. They recognize when an area of pigment begins to weaken, when the heat shifts its texture, or when the wind dulls the surface. Instead of removing everything, they repair it with small adjustments. This slow, attentive care mirrors how they approach other aspects of survival. Mending clothing instead of replacing it, adjusting roots rather than abandoning them, conserving energy to withstand the demands of the land. The endurance of these markings also reflects a worldview shaped by the desert. Things that last hold value. Fragile or temporary appearances carry less meaning. A woman's painted face becomes a commitment, something she carries into work ceremonies and daily interactions. The markings merge with her identity, becoming recognizable not just for their design, but for their presence over time. A face that remains steady through days of sun and sand quietly announces strength. These long-lasting pigments contribute to social cohesion as well. People rely on these markings to understand one another's roles, relationships, and statuses. If the markings faded daily, the effort to maintain clarity would be immense. By lasting several days, they provide stability in communication. A woman marked for a ceremony remains identifiable throughout its duration. A girl undergoing a rite of transition carries her symbols visibly until the process is complete. The markings persist long enough to support the meanings they hold. Children watching these practices absorb the rhythm of maintenance long before they understand the symbolism. They see how their mothers press clay into place, reapply oil at the edges, and treat the markings as part of their everyday responsibilities. Over time, this exposure transforms into skill. By the time they reach adolescence, they understand that beauty in the desert is not something that resets each morning. It accumulates slowly, built from layers of tradition, material, and experience. The durability also demonstrates the practicality of their techniques. Windstorms, long travels, and hours under the sun do not erase the markings. Instead, the environment reinforces them. The dry air preserves the clay, the heat warms the oils, the lack of humidity keeps the pigments from smudging. What might seem harsh conditions for beauty routines elsewhere become elements that support them here. What remains most striking is how these prolonged markings challenge modern assumptions about appearance. There is no urgency to change, no pressure to refresh, no expectation of daily transformation. A woman may wear the same design for days, and others see this not as repetition, but as steadiness. I find it striking that the endurance of these layers does not diminish their meaning but deepens it, giving the face a quiet authority shaped by time rather than novelty. Through these sustained markings, women carry symbols of identity, memory, and survival across days without interruption. Their faces become records of continuity in a landscape where little else remains consistent. The desert shifts constantly, but its markings stay anchoring them in tradition. These enduring layers show how beauty becomes intertwined with resilience in the desert. A closer look reveals that longevity, not change, defines their aesthetic values. As that realization settles deeper, the weight behind their long-lasting markings becomes impossible to overlook. In Sahara communities, the purpose of face painting emerges from the landscape itself. The desert shapes every decision, every gesture, and every form of expression, leaving little space for embellishment, meant to charm or attract. Women do not mix pigments with the intention of drawing romantic attention. Instead, they prepare their faces for the demands of the environment and the expectations of their community. The lines and colors they wear signal experience, endurance, and identity. Beauty becomes an extension of survival, not a strategy of seduction. Each stroke of pigment carries a meaning tied to a woman's role or stage of life. Girls approaching adulthood wear markings that reflect transition. Married women carry symbols that indicate their responsibilities. Elders display lines that speak of decades spent navigating heat, scarcity, and shifting winds. These symbols inform others without the need for speech. They offer clarity in a world where misunderstanding can lead to conflict, confusion, or danger. It is almost quietly humorous that what others might mistake as decoration functions here as something closer to a practical language. The desert's harshness pushes appearance away from vanity. Women paint their faces to shield their skin from relentless sunlight, extreme dryness, and blowing sand. The pigments act as barriers, absorbing heat and preventing injury. Yet these same pigments also communicate status and history. This dual purpose allows the markings to become integral to daily life. They are not optional. They serve both body and society, blending practicality with cultural preservation. For young women, learning this system becomes part of growing up. They observe the patterns worn by their mothers, grandmothers, and aunts, studying how each marking shifts according to circumstance. They learn which symbols appear during rituals which belong to mourning, which signal authority, and which should never be used without purpose. Their training does not revolve around beauty as defined by attraction. Instead, it focuses on clarity, respect, and responsibility. If someone tried to find a modern comparison, it might resemble a visual code that publicly conveys experience or rank rather than emotion or intent. Men understand these meanings instinctively. They do not interpret painted faces as invitations or attempts to impress. They see symbols identifying capability, maturity, or familial responsibility. A woman's markings guide interactions long before any personal connection forms. The desert does not allow for ambiguous signals, and the cultural system reflects that necessity. Men do not expect women to enhance themselves for romantic purposes. They expect markings that convey truth. Ceremonial markings further emphasize survival over attraction. During weddings, births, or seasonal gatherings, women wear designs that represent lineage transitions or blessings. These markings are meant to align individuals with the community and its traditions. Even brides do not paint their faces to appear more appealing. They display symbols tied to ancestry and future obligations. Beauty in these moments serves continuity, not attention. The women who apply ceremonial markings hold significant authority. They are trusted to understand meanings precisely, to read tradition clearly, and to repeat symbols accurately. Their hands place each line with deliberation, recognizing that the markings are not meant to please, but to affirm identity within the group. A misplaced design could confuse roles or disrupt ritual significance. Accuracy becomes a matter of respect, not aesthetics. Daily life also reflects this function-driven approach. Women who spend hours traveling under intense heat require markings that protect their skin. They reinforce these layers when necessary, relying on pigments made from clay, ash, charcoal, or natural oils. The desert strips away anything unnecessary, and what survives becomes essential. Painted faces remain not because they are attractive, but because they work. Children learn this early. They see how a marked face withstands sun and wind more effectively than an unpainted one. They watch adults interpret markings to understand someone's role or experience. As they grow, they begin to associate beauty with functionality, endurance, and clarity. Attraction plays little role in shaping their perception of appearance. What matters is strength. Outsiders often misunderstand this perspective. They assume that the pigments serve the same purposes they do elsewhere: embellishment, flirtation, or self-expression. But in the Sahara, these assumptions collapse under the weight of reality. The desert narrows priorities to what matters most: survival, community, and continuity. Women paint their faces because doing so protects them, identifies them, and connects them to their ancestors. Their appearance becomes both shield and statement. Even during social interactions, romantic expectation rarely enters the meaning of these markings. Conversations do not revolve around attractiveness. Observations do not fixate on perceived beauty. Instead, people focus on clarity, whether someone's markings reflect correct roles, rituals, or responsibilities. A face that is painted properly signals discipline and respect for tradition. A face painted carelessly signals inexperience or disregard. In this context, beauty emerges from endurance. A woman whose markings remain steady after days of heat or dust becomes admirable. Her ability to maintain clarity despite the environment's challenges demonstrates skill and resilience. Her markings do not attempt to allure. They assert survival. I find it striking that the desert transforms appearance into testimony rather than ornament, making beauty something earned rather than displayed. Ultimately, these markings reflect a worldview shaped entirely by necessity. A woman paints her face not to attract, but to exist within a system that values meaning, continuity, and resilience. Her pigments link her to her ancestors, guide her interactions, and protect her body. She does not need flirtation when survival demands clarity. Her beauty is neither accidental nor decorative. It is functional, ancestral, and deeply rooted in the landscape she calls home. This purpose-driven approach reveals how deeply survival shapes identity in the desert. A closer look shows that beauty becomes a declaration of endurance rather than desire. When that understanding becomes clearer, the logic behind every painted line gains a clarity that leaves little room for misunderstanding. Observing the faces of women across the Sahara with patience makes it clear that their aesthetic ideals evolve under conditions where delicate beauty rarely finds room to survive. The desert's light is harsh, the wind is unfiltered, and the air shifts with an intensity that demands a certain firmness from anyone who lives within it. In such an environment, beauty naturally drifts toward shapes that hold their presence rather than soften into subtlety. Makeup becomes a quiet reinforcement of stability, carved into lines that endure the impact of sun, sand, and long hours of exposure. Instead of seeking gentleness, the aesthetic grows from the need to remain steady in a place that rarely allows the luxury of vulnerability. The markings placed around the eyes illustrate this clearly. Dark pigments drawn with defined edges stay visible even when wind pushes across the face or when brightness overwhelms the landscape. These shapes give structure to features that might otherwise be washed out by intense light, creating a visual anchor that helps the wearer maintain identity in the vastness of open terrain. The strength of these lines is not theatrical. It is a response to daily conditions. A firm contour stands its ground far better than a soft blur ever could in the desert's climate. Across many groups, the visual emphasis remains on clarity. A cheekbone may be reinforced with a dark stroke to create a stable shape, and brows are often marked with precision to signal maturity or attentiveness. These choices ensure that the face retains definition even after hours under the open sky. There is no reliance on fleeting softness here. Instead, every placement of color reflects a preference for forms that persist under physical strain. Over generations, this approach becomes normal shaping, a collective understanding of beauty that prioritizes resilience. Gentleness is not rejected, but it does not guide the aesthetic. Fragility holds little advantage in a region where heat can deplete energy quickly and where visibility matters for both recognition and communication. The result is a landscape of faces that present themselves with confidence, defined by strong lines that last through the day without fading. What might seem intense to an outsider is experienced within the community as a natural extension of life in the desert. Stability becomes a visual language. In some areas, darker pigments help sharpen expressions further. These pigments strengthen the gaze, allowing the eyes to remain visible despite glare. They lend a grounded quality to the face, reinforcing presence and focus. Even when a person moves calmly or speaks softly, the defined features communicate steadiness. This appearance aligns with community expectations, where inner endurance is respected and outward calm is appreciated. The look is not designed to impress, but to represent a way of living. Patterns applied to the face often follow generational habits. Simple shapes hold meaning because they have been repeated through many lifetimes. A straight line may suggest discipline, while a heavier contour highlights determination. Children grow up watching these markings appear on the faces around them, learning their meaning without formal explanation. By the time they adopt the same practices, the connection between strength and beauty feels instinctive. The environment reinforces these values, ensuring that aesthetics never drift far from practicality. The emphasis on strength does not function as a threat, Instead, it reflects an understanding that clarity is necessary for survival. A face with defined features holds steady in a landscape that constantly shifts. The marks applied to skin help maintain visibility and identity, offering a sense of groundedness even during long journeys. The desert demands presence, not fragility, and the aesthetic evolves accordingly. This approach moves away from the idea that beauty must appear delicate to be meaningful. Subtlety fades quickly under fierce sunlight and heavy wind, leaving only the bold to remain visible. Within this framework, strength becomes the foundation of beauty, and the community supports it through consistent practice. Lines, colors, and structures work together to create faces that reflect the resilience of those who wear them. Nothing is added for luxury. Everything is shaped with purpose. The face acts as a practical surface rather than a symbolic one. Defined shapes help maintain clear recognition, even from a distance, especially when the environment is bright enough to blur softer details. A firm line does not disappear under the sun. It remains fixed, offering continuity and identity. This blend of beauty and utility becomes second nature to those who live in the Sahara, where adaptation is constant and clarity is a form of protection. Over time, these strong visual structures transform into a quiet expectation within the culture. A face without definition may seem unprepared or unfinished, while a face marked with steady lines signals readiness for the day ahead. These impressions form gradually through repeated experiences. They become part of the community's understanding of what it means to present oneself confidently in a demanding environment. The desert does not forgive fragility, and the aesthetic that emerges mirrors this truth. This emphasis on visible strength reflects how beauty adapts to the harsh realities of the Sahara. The more closely one looks, the more natural these firm lines appear in such an environment. With this understanding in place, curiosity begins to rise about how different groups across the region express these values through distinct styles of their own. Patterns drawn across the Sahara do not belong to a single tradition, and anyone observing the region with patience will notice how each community develops a style shaped by its own history, climate, and movement across the land. The vastness of the desert does not erase individuality. Instead, it gives each group the space to preserve its own markings. Within this landscape, the Tuareg, the Fulani, and the Berber communities carry forward distinct visual identities that remain stable despite the pressures of time and change. These differences are not decorative choices but reflections of deeply rooted cultural memories. The Tuareg, known for their indigo veils and calm bearing, employ facial markings that appear measured and quiet, but they serve practical and symbolic purposes. Lines across the cheeks and near the eyes are placed with a precision that comes from generations of repeated practice. These strokes help create clarity under the desert sun and give structure to expressions that might otherwise be subdued beneath layers of cloth. The calm repetition of the patterns forms a kind of continuity between past and present. People who grow up among the Tuareg understand these markings long before they wear them, learning their placement by watching elders prepare for daily life. In contrast, the Fulani often use markings that involve carefully placed dots or slender lines arranged in sequences. These shapes may appear simple, yet they require steady hands and familiarity with inherited techniques. The Fulani style maintains a balance between definition and restraint. Each dot carries weight because of its position connecting the wearer to family, ancestry, or social standing. In communities where cattle herding shapes daily routines, these markings create a stable sense of identity in environments that shift between movement and stillness. The markings remain visible even after long journeys beneath the sun, which is one reason the Fulani rely on them as consistent identifiers. The Berber communities spread across wide regions use patterns that vary depending on local customs, but still share a recognizable structure. Their shapes often include straight lines mixed with small curves or angular turns, creating forms that remain distinct but uniform enough to connect one region to another. These markings represent layers of cultural continuity that have survived displacement trade and shifting borders. They serve as quiet reminders of stories passed down across generations. Young people learn them not through formal instruction, but through daily observation, watching how elders mark their faces during gatherings, celebrations, or routine tasks. Across all these groups, the variation in style does not lead to conflict. Instead, it reinforces the idea that beauty and identity change according to environment and heritage. A single line can carry different meanings depending on who wears it. One tribe may interpret a vertical stroke as a sign of adulthood, while another connects it to family lineage. The diversity of styles helps preserve the uniqueness of each community, preventing the desert's expansive silence from flattening individuality. These distinctions become even clearer during group gatherings. When communities meet for trade celebrations or seasonal events, the markings help identify where each person comes from. Recognition happens quickly because the visual language has been learned over time. People see the patterns and understand their significance without speaking. This method of identification reduces confusion and helps maintain order during interactions. It also strengthens a sense of belonging for those who share a style, reinforcing bonds within the group. Environmental differences contribute to stylistic variation as well. Some regions of the Sahara face harsher winds, while others experience longer periods of intense sun. These practical conditions influence the thickness, shape, and placement of markings. A group living in an area with especially bright light may favor lines that frame the eyes to improve contrast. Another group facing frequent sandstorms may use pigments that stay in place for longer periods. Over time, environmental adaptation becomes tradition, and the markings evolve into recognizable signatures. Materials used for pigments also differ by region. One community may rely heavily on red earth, while another uses charcoal or plant-based mixtures. The availability of these resources shapes the appearance of the markings and ensures that each group retains its connection to the land. These materials are not chosen for aesthetic preference alone. They reflect generations of survival. People use what endures, and what endures becomes part of cultural identity. Despite the diversity, no group considers another's markings inferior. Each community sees its patterns as a continuation of its own story, shaped by ancestors and maintained for the sake of coherence. Outsiders might assume that differences imply separation, but within the Sahara variation is expected. The desert widens the space between groups, but does not sever their sense of continuity. People understand that markings carry history, and history cannot be replaced simply by adopting a different style. These aesthetic distinctions ensure that identity persists even under harsh conditions. When a person travels or settles temporarily near another group, their markings communicate their origin immediately. The visual clarity prevents misunderstandings and helps establish trust during interactions. It also reinforces personal confidence, reminding individuals of the community that supports them. Over generations, these visual systems become quiet archives of cultural survival. They allow each tribe to navigate a demanding landscape without losing its sense of belonging. Diversity becomes a form of resilience rather than division. The desert holds many stories, and each marking is a small piece of one of those stories visible on the face of the person who carries it. These distinctions reveal how each community preserves identity through its own markings. Each variation points quietly toward the memories that formed it. Something deeper waits in the understanding of how tradition endures when fashion has no meaning in the desert. Trends do not exist in the Sahara in the way they are understood elsewhere. The desert does not encourage rapid change, nor does it reward constant reinvention. Styles do not rise and fall with seasons, and they are not shaped by distant opinions or passing ideals. What remains instead is a stable pattern that has endured through generations, held together by repetition and memory. Women in the Sahara do not wait to wonder what might be fashionable tomorrow. They turn to the markings they have known since childhood. These markings do not shift in response to outside influence, because their purpose is not aesthetic novelty, but cultural continuity. There are no posters, no magazines, and no digital platforms dictating what beauty should look like. The idea of beauty itself is not built on comparison or competition. Instead, it is rooted in the steady presence of familiar lines, colors, and textures carried through time. In many cases, the same designs worn hundreds of years ago remain unchanged today. Older women teach younger ones through observation rather than instruction. A granddaughter, watching her grandmother prepare for a gathering, learns the order of steps, the placement of pigment, and the meaning behind each choice. The process becomes part of daily life before it becomes something she performs herself. Because the desert environment moves slowly, culture follows its pace. New ideas do not sweep through communities as rapid trends. Travel across long distances is demanding. Communication with distant groups is slow. This natural separation protects each community from external pressures that might disrupt its traditions. The markings worn today often match those seen in old accounts or early drawings made by travelers. Their endurance reflects a shared decision to maintain the expressions that define who they are, not to chase something fleeting. Some might assume that this lack of change represents stagnation, but within these communities, continuity is considered a strength. A marking repeated over generations becomes a reliable link between people and their ancestors. Families trace their identities through patterns, just as they might through stories or names. A woman wearing a design known to be passed down through her lineage carries more than lines on her skin. She carries her connection to those who came before her. This connection does not fade when trends shift, because there are no trends to challenge it. When women gather during communal rituals, the uniformity of certain designs strengthens their sense of belonging. The absence of competition allows for calm interactions. No one tries to appear more modern or more fashionable than the others. Instead, every face presents a familiar language that is recognized and respected within the group. This consistency offers comfort. People know what each marking means, and they know what to expect when they read it. This reliability is especially important in environments where survival depends on dependable relationships. Even when outside materials or ideas enter the region, they do not affect the markings easily. Foreign pigments may be available, but most women prefer to continue using earth ash or natural powders they have always relied on. These materials carry meaning, and meaning cannot be replaced by novelty. Any attempt to introduce new styles would feel disconnected from the community's memory. Changes do occur over long periods, but they unfold slowly, almost unnoticed, guided by necessity rather than by desire for reinvention. This sense of permanence shapes attitudes toward beauty. Women do not aim to reinvent themselves through appearance. They do not view makeup as a tool for transformation, but as a reminder of who they already are. Each line reinforces identity instead of altering it. The desert encourages this stability by pushing back against anything fragile or temporary. Pigments that last become preferred. Practices that endure are valued. Seasonal pressure does not exist here, so appearance does not need to shift in response to external trends. A design suitable for a ceremony today will be suitable years later. A marking used in marriage rites a century ago may still be used in the same context now. Even the younger women who encounter limited outside influence choose to maintain the patterns not because they fear change, but because they recognize the importance of preservation. Change for the sake of change holds no appeal in a place where survival depends on tradition. When people from outside the region observe these markings, they sometimes expect variety or innovation. They assume that creativity expresses itself through constant evolution. But creativity in the Sahara expresses itself through precision repetition and the ability to honor inherited paths. A woman perfecting the same lines her grandmother used is not limiting herself. She is continuing a conversation with her past. That conversation is more important than the introduction of something new. Generational continuity also shapes the way women see their role in the community. When a woman repeats a design that has existed for centuries, she participates in the community's collective memory. She responds not to trends, but to responsibility. Her markings place her within a timeline, linking her to both ancestors and future descendants. The unbroken chain provides stability in a place where the environment can be unforgiving. In this context, makeup becomes a form of steady reflection rather than personal experimentation. It preserves what should not be lost. It resists the erasure that rapid change can bring. By keeping traditions intact, communities maintain a sense of coherence that might otherwise falter under external influence. The desert holds memory in its quiet spaces, and these markings help maintain that memory across generations. This persistence reveals how deeply tradition governs beauty in the Sahara. Each repeated marking reinforces the bond between people and their heritage. A calmer truth waits in the understanding of why continuity matters more than novelty in such a demanding landscape. Western cosmetics did not enter the Sahara the way traders expected them to. When small containers of powders, creams, and tinted products arrived, with merchants moving between settlements, some outsiders assumed these items would quickly replace the natural pigments used by local women. The belief was based on a misunderstanding of how beauty functioned within the desert. The bright packaging and perfumed scents held no significance for communities that measured value through durability, familiarity, and ancestral continuity. When the products were presented, the reaction was steady and uncomplicated refusal. There was no anger, no dramatic confrontation, only a calm rejection grounded in long-held principles. The women who examined the foreign powders found them unfamiliar in texture and inconsistent in performance. Many did not trust substances whose origin they could not trace. Earth, ash, charcoal, and plant mixtures had served their communities for generations. These materials were collected, prepared, and applied in ways that connected women to the environment that sustained them. A cream manufactured far away, passed through the hands of traders, and sealed in a metal tin, could not compete with the stability of what was already known. The decision to reject the imported products was not a reaction against modernity. It was a choice made in favor of continuity. Some groups voiced concern that adopting foreign cosmetics would signal the erosion of identity. The markings and pigments used in the Sahara were not simply decorative expressions. They carried meaning tied to family lineage and ritual. Introducing new substances risked altering the appearance of these markings or disrupting their symbolism. Women recognized that pigment changes might lead to changes in interpretation. In communities where each line or dot corresponded to specific roles or histories, altering the medium meant altering the message. The desire to preserve meaning outweighed curiosity about new materials. For other groups, the refusal came from practical observation. Foreign powders did not endure harsh sunlight in the same way natural pigments did. They softened too quickly, disappeared with sweat, or shifted under heat. A desert that demands resilience from its inhabitants cannot accommodate products that fail after a few hours. Women noticed the instability immediately. Pigments, made from earth and ash, bonded with the skin, resisting winds that could strip surfaces clean. Creams designed for milder climates could not withstand the environment, and this weakness eliminated any appeal they might have had. The foreign scents also conflicted with desert customs. Many of the imported items carried strong fragrances unfamiliar to local communities. Some women found the smell intrusive, while others considered it inappropriate for rituals or gatherings. Traditional pigments carried the natural scent of their source materials, which blended easily with the environment. Introducing foreign scents created a contrast that felt unsettling. The desert rewards subtlety, and these products introduced intensity instead. Elders in several communities saw foreign cosmetics as symbols of unnecessary dependence. Using them meant relying on outside trade networks, an idea that clashed with long-held values of self-sufficiency. The Sahara teaches its residents to rely on what they can gather, prepare, and maintain themselves. Imported products, even when affordable, created a sense of reliance that many were unwilling to accept. Women who had learned to create their own pigments found pride in the continuity of that knowledge. Abandoning it felt like abandoning a piece of themselves. In some regions, the rejection was tied to memory. Older women remembered stories of travelers who brought unfamiliar materials in the past, leading to misunderstandings or unintended consequences. These memories reinforced caution. While the stories differed, the lesson was consistent: only trust what has endured. A foreign product that promises improvement but lacks generational validation cannot be granted immediate acceptance. This cautious approach protected communities from disruptions that might appear harmless at first glance. Even younger women, who might have been expected to show interest in novelty, maintained the same stance. They had grown up watching their mothers prepare pigments from natural materials. They understood the meaning of the markings and the stability of the process. The absence of pressure to seek something new made it easy to remain loyal to tradition. Without the influence of large markets or external standards of beauty, there was no incentive to adopt foreign products that offered no benefit. The merchants who attempted to introduce these cosmetics often failed to understand the reason behind the rejection. They assumed the issue was cost or lack of familiarity. They did not see that the rejection was rooted in meaning, not misunderstanding. In the Sahara, beauty is a continuation of memory, not a pursuit of novelty. A product that disrupts memory holds no value. Even when small amounts of foreign cosmetics were accepted out of courtesy, they were rarely used. They remained stored away, unopened containers that represented curiosity rather than change. Their presence did not alter practices. The desert's rhythms continued without interruption, and the markings worn by women remained the same. The continuity reinforced confidence in the decision to refuse what did not belong. Over time, traders learned that certain goods would be welcomed while others would not. Tools, fabric, and metal items found a place in daily life because they addressed practical needs or enhanced existing practices. But cosmetics did not fill any gap. Beauty in the Sahara already had a foundation, and that foundation needed preservation, not replacement. The refusal of Western cosmetics revealed a deeper truth about resilience. Communities that survive through harsh conditions learn to protect the elements that hold them together. The pigments used by Sahara women were more than physical materials. They were cultural anchors. Allowing them to be replaced without reason would threaten the stability that tradition provides. This rejection reveals how strongly these communities guard the symbols that define them. Each decision to turn away foreign products deepens their connection to long-standing practices. Something else emerges when considering how they preserve beauty in a place where water itself is uncertain. Water is not a reliable resource in the Sahara, and its scarcity shapes every aspect of daily life, including the way women care for their skin and maintain their appearance. Bathing, cleansing, and refreshing, the body cannot follow the routines familiar to regions where water flows easily. Instead, women develop practices that rely on materials found in the environment, using sand, oil, and dry pigments to keep their skin conditioned, despite constant heat and wind. These methods are not improvised solutions, but carefully refined techniques passed down over time. Each step reflects knowledge built through observation and necessity, rather than outside instruction. Dry bathing with sand is one of the most common practices. The sand, warmed by the sun and shaped by the wind, becomes a tool rather than an obstacle. Women move it across their skin in slow, steady motions. The sand lifts sweat, dust, and oils without stripping the skin. It acts as a natural exfoliant, removing buildup that might otherwise irritate. Unlike water, sand does not evaporate or disappear. It remains present and usable, despite shifting conditions. Women learn how to choose grains suitable for different parts of the body. Fine grains are used for sensitive areas, while coarser grains help clear tougher patches. This method maintains cleanliness in an environment where water cannot serve the same purpose. Oil plays an equally important role. With constant exposure to the sun and wind, skin loses moisture quickly. Without protection, dryness would lead to cracking and discomfort. Women apply natural oils extracted from seeds or collected from wild plants. The oils settle into the skin, forming a protective layer that helps retain moisture and deflect harsh elements. These oils also serve as the base for pigments used in makeup. When mixed with earth or ash, they create markings that adhere more firmly, resisting sweat and wind. The combination of sand and oil becomes a full routine that supports both health and tradition. Because these techniques rely on steady maintenance, rather than daily washing, makeup does not require removal each evening. Pigments stay in place for days, held by layers of oil and earth that bind together. This longevity is practical. In harsh heat, repeatedly removing and reapplying markings would waste valuable resources and increase the risk of damaging the skin. Instead, women apply pigments with care, expecting them to last through daily tasks, travel, or gatherings. They refresh areas only when needed. The absence of water does not diminish the precision of their appearance. The durability of these techniques allows beauty to remain intact, even when the environment offers no support. The lack of water creates a different relationship with cleanliness. Cleanliness is not defined by the presence of water, but by the absence of irritation, odor, and visible buildup. Sand removes impurities without dissolving them. Oil protects skin without leaving residue that would break down under heat. These methods form a complete system that maintains the skin's condition with minimal resources. Women think of care in terms of endurance rather than renewal. Their routines must hold up under long hours of sun, wind, and movement. These techniques extend to makeup application. Dry pigments require a stable base to remain visible throughout the day. Oils help bind the materials, preventing the markings from smudging or fading under extreme conditions. Women test the consistency by feeling how pigments move beneath their fingers. If the mix holds firm, it is ready. If it slips, they adjust the ratio of sand, oil, and pigment. This process is not standardized, but learned by touch. Each woman develops a sense of what works for her skin, for her environment, and for the meaning behind her markings. In some communities, dry beauty practices are performed collectively. Women gather to prepare sand, mix oils, and distribute pigments. They discuss how the climate has changed, how their skin feels under recent conditions, or whether new batches of oil behave differently from previous ones. These gatherings help reinforce shared knowledge and ensure consistency across generations. Younger women learn through participation, watching how older women make adjustments based on subtle shifts in temperature or wind. Travelers observing these routines often misunderstand them. They expect water to be central to beauty and hygiene, and they interpret its absence as a deficiency. But in the Sahara, the absence of water is simply a condition to be managed. The women do not view their methods as inferior or temporary. They see them as appropriate responses to the landscape. Sand cleans without demanding scarce resources. Oil protects without clashing with the climate. Pigments adhere without requiring daily correction. The system functions precisely because it does not depend on what the desert cannot provide. The stability of these techniques ensures that physical appearance remains consistent despite environmental challenges. Women maintain smooth-conditioned skin even after days of wind exposure. Their markings remain clear despite travel across dunes or work under harsh sunlight. The durability of their practices offers a sense of control in an environment where control can be difficult to maintain. Beauty becomes an extension of resilience, not a pursuit of comparison or luxury. These routines also highlight the intelligence embedded in traditions shaped by necessity. Women understand their environment intimately. They know how to manage dryness, how to protect against irritation, and how to preserve markings without access to water. This knowledge does not rely on external authority. It belongs to the community and evolves only when a genuine need arises. New materials are not adopted simply because they are available. Techniques change only when they improve survival, comfort, or continuity. Dry beauty practices reflect an acceptance of reality rather than resistance to it. Women work with what the desert gives them. They do not attempt to impose systems unsuited to their environment. The result is a routine that appears simple, but contains layers of practical wisdom. Through these methods, they maintain both comfort and identity in a place where conditions challenge both. These techniques reveal how beauty adapts when water cannot be counted on. Each practice reflects decisions grounded in survival rather than preference. Another layer becomes clear when examining how they protect their eyes from the brightness and particles carried by the wind. The desert forces every detail of life to adjust to its light, heat, and constant movement of air. Nowhere is this more visible than in the way women prepare the area around their eyes. The Sahara offers almost no relief from brightness, and dust never fully settles. For those living within this environment, unprotected eyes would struggle from dawn until night. To manage these conditions, women apply dark pigments, usually charcoal or black powder, around their eyes in steady, practiced motions. This technique is not decorative, nor is it meant to alter appearance for beauty alone. It is a practical response shaped through necessity and refined through generations. Charcoal is collected from burned wood or plant material. Women crush it into a fine powder, testing its texture between their fingers. The powder must be smooth without coarse fragments that could irritate the skin. Once prepared, it is mixed with a small amount of natural oil to help it bind. The mixture is applied slowly around the eyes, extending along the lower and upper lids. This creates a defined dark outline that absorbs some of the harsh sunlight. The darkness reduces glare, allowing the eyes to remain open longer without strain. The pigment also helps protect against dust. Fine grains of sand carried by the wind can irritate or scratch the eyes if they settle too close to the surface. The oily mixture forms a slight barrier, encouraging dust to cling to the pigment rather than entering the eyes. Women understand the balance needed. Too much oil attracts excess dust, while too little makes the mixture crumble. They apply just enough to maintain protection without discomfort. This technique echoes practices used by ancient warriors in various regions who relied on similar substances to sharpen vision in bright conditions. But here the method survives not through legend or ritual, but through daily necessity. Women apply the pigment before leaving their homes, before walking long distances, or before working under the sun. The repetition makes the process instinctive. Young girls learn to mimic the motions even before understanding their full purpose, watching how their mothers and older sisters prepare each morning. For those unfamiliar with the environment, the appearance may seem purely cosmetic. Observers often assume the dark pigment is an aesthetic choice, perhaps part of a broader tradition of facial marking. While it does become part of cultural expression, its foundation is practical. People living in the Sahara cannot afford to be uncomfortable around their eyes. Limited vision or repeated irritation would make everyday tasks significantly harder. The pigment is therefore a tool first, an identifier second, and an aesthetic component only after those functions are fulfilled. Women monitor how the pigment responds throughout the day, Under intense heat, the oil may soften, requiring a small adjustment. During wind-heavy hours, dust may accumulate along the outer edges, prompting a quick wipe and reapplication. These adjustments are made calmly and without ceremony. They reflect an understanding of the environment, rather than vanity. The pigment is not meant to look perfect. It is meant to endure. The material's durability is one reason it remains trusted. Natural charcoal does not dissolve under heat the way certain foreign cosmetic products do. It does not irritate the skin when prepared correctly. It remains stable, even after long hours of travel. Women rely on its predictability. When applying the pigment, they do not expect transformation, they expect stability. The dark outline also affects how expressions are interpreted. The Sahara's brightness can flatten facial features, making it difficult to read emotion from a distance. The pigment adds contrast, making eye movements easier to see. This practical visibility helps with communication during group travel or work. In many cases, a glance carries more information than spoken words, and the pigment helps preserve that clarity. Women also understand how pigment placement changes depending on tasks. For long journeys, they apply a thicker line along the lower lid to guard against reflection from the sand beneath. For tasks requiring close focus, they use a thinner application to avoid obstructing peripheral vision. Their choices reflect skill rather than instinct. Each variation has been shaped by experience learned through observation rather than formal instruction. Even the process of preparing charcoal is part of communal knowledge. Women gather burned material after cooking fires or other controlled burns, selecting pieces that have cooled completely. They grind the charcoal using stones or wooden tools. The sound of grinding becomes a familiar background noise in many settlements. The preparation is shared, but not spoken about with ceremony. It is simply part of life, like arranging sleeping mats or storing water. Travelers sometimes misunderstand the significance of this pigment. They describe it as exotic or unusual, missing the practical purpose behind it. For the women who use it, the technique is neither unusual nor remarkable. It is as ordinary as tying a headscarf or rubbing oil on the skin. Its effectiveness leaves no reason to abandon it. Even when confronted with foreign products promising superior protection, women continue using charcoal because they know exactly how it performs in their environment. This stability is not resistant to change for the sake of tradition alone. If a new material genuinely offered better protection, communities would eventually consider it. But nothing so far has matched the combination of availability, durability, and familiarity offered by charcoal. It integrates easily into daily routines and reflects generations of adaptation to the desert. Through all these practices, the eyes remain protected, allowing women to work, travel, and participate in daily life without constant discomfort. Their appearance might be interpreted by outsiders as intentional styling, but the real motivation is straightforward survival. In a landscape where sun and sand define every hour, the pigment around the eyes stands as a reminder that adaptation can be simple yet effective. This practice reveals how the desert shapes even the smallest details of appearance. Each dark line reflects a balance between necessity and tradition. A further layer becomes visible when considering how rituals influence when and why certain markings are allowed to appear. Makeup in the Sahara does not appear without purpose. It is not applied casually or according to personal impulse. Instead, it is tied to specific rituals and moments that define a person's position within the community. Women understand from an early age that markings carry meanings beyond appearance. They are symbols connected to time, circumstance, and social role. Because of this, the act of applying them becomes something controlled, deliberate, and often restricted. Nothing about it is spontaneous, and nothing is done without considering its significance. Certain markings are worn only during communal ceremonies. These ceremonies may occur annually, seasonally, or in response to important events within the group. Women prepare for them slowly. They mix pigments with great attention to texture and shade. Their movements become quiet and consistent, shaped by generations of repetition. The markings applied for these events differ from those worn daily. They are more intricate, more structured, and placed with a precision meant to convey respect for the ritual taking place. The timing of the application also matters. Some designs are reserved for early mornings, others for evenings. Women know the proper moment because they learn it through observation and correction. Older women guide younger ones by demonstrating how the markings respond to changes in light and temperature. A design that seems clear at dawn might blur under the midday sun. Ritual markings must remain intact for the entire ceremony, which may last many hours. The method used for these markings reflects not just skill, but awareness of the environment. A major distinction occurs in the markings associated with marriage. When a woman prepares for marriage, she receives designs reserved exclusively for those entering this stage of life. These markings appear only once and will not be repeated in the same form again. They indicate her transition into a new role and acknowledge the responsibilities she will take on. Family members witness the process, watching the steady formation of lines, dots, or shapes that identify her new position. The application may take hours, but no one rushes. The slowness itself is part of the meaning. Childbirth also introduces a distinct set of markings. These appear only after a woman has delivered her child and recovered enough to participate in social gatherings again. The markings signal her new status. They communicate that she has taken on another role within the community. No woman who has not given birth may wear these designs. The restriction is not intended to create hierarchy, but to maintain clarity within the group. Every person understands which phase of life another has reached, simply by seeing their markings. Some markings belong to mourning. During periods of grief, women wear specific patterns that inform the community of their emotional and social state. These markings are subdued, simple, and consistent. No one displays elaborate or celebratory designs during this time. The markings guide how others should interact with the woman. They help maintain social stability by clarifying the boundaries of conversation and attention. When mourning ends, the markings are removed and replaced with those appropriate to daily life. Ritual significance extends beyond major life events. Within some communities, certain markings appear during harvest, others during migration, and others still during gatherings involving music or storytelling. Each setting introduces a distinct meaning. Women do not choose markings based on preference. They choose based on what the ritual demands. The pigments, lines, and placements act as signals that reinforce communal identity. The meaning of these signals is understood even without discussion. The process of preparation for ritual makeup often occurs in groups. Women gather in designated spaces. The atmosphere is steady and quiet. They grind pigments, prepare oils, and organize tools in a methodical order. Younger women assist by observing and handing materials to older women. In this setting, teaching happens naturally. Mistakes are corrected softly and without interruption. The environment is disciplined, but not strict. Everyone understands the importance of getting each detail right. Because makeup plays such a significant role in rituals, there are limits on who may apply it. Some communities allow only specific women to perform the application for others. These women are not considered priests or specialists in a formal sense, but they carry knowledge passed through their families. Their skill ensures that markings remain precise and consistent. People trust these women to maintain the standards expected during important events. Although anyone may prepare pigments or assist with grinding, only these designated individuals apply the actual markings. Foreigners witnessing these rituals often misunderstand them. They assume the markings represent personal expression or artistic style. They do not realize that each marking is connected to specific obligations and roles. The beauty seen in these designs is secondary to the meaning behind them. The desert teaches its communities to value clarity, and ritual markings offer exactly that. They communicate identity, responsibility, and belonging without speaking a word. The significance of ritual makeup also influences how women behave while wearing it. Those marked for marriage do not engage in the same activities as those marked for mourning. Those who wear harvest markings participate in specific tasks. Ritual makeup becomes a temporary identity, guiding actions during the event. Once the ritual ends, the markings fade or are removed through careful wiping with sand or oil. The transition from marked to unmarked signals the conclusion of the ritual period. Through all of this, the sacred quality of makeup remains constant. It is sacred not because of ceremony alone, but because of continuity. Women today prepare markings in much the same way that their ancestors did. The details may shift subtly with time, but the meaning does not. The desert holds many challenges, and rituals help maintain coherence among those who inhabit it. Makeup is one of the tools through which this coherence is preserved. These rituals reveal how deeply makeup becomes tied to identity in the Sahara. Each marking reflects a moment that carries social meaning. A further depth appears when the markings themselves become stories passed across generations through family lines. A woman's face in the Sahara often carries more than color or pattern. It carries a sequence of markings that existed long before she was born, repeated across generations with near identical precision. These markings are not created spontaneously, nor do they emerge from personal preference. They continue because each line represents a memory tied to the people who wore it before her. The desert, with its vast distances and unchanging horizon, encourages this continuity. Families maintain markings as a way of holding on to stories that might otherwise disappear in a place where wind and time erase physical traces quickly. Mothers teach daughters how to recreate these designs by guiding their hands, adjusting their pressure, and refining their movements until the markings match those worn by earlier generations. The process is not ceremonial but quiet and steady. A daughter does not learn just the technique, but the connection behind it. She becomes aware that the marking she wears is the same one her mother wore at the same age and the same one her grandmother applied decades earlier. The repetition anchors her to a family lineage held together not by written history, but by consistency in appearance. These markings differ slightly between families. One group might place a vertical line near the eye to indicate maternal heritage, while another uses a pattern of small dots on the cheekbone to reflect ancestral ties. These differences are recognized within communities, making each face an identifiable record of family history. Older women, upon seeing a younger woman's markings, can name her relatives, recall past events, and understand her place within the social structure. The markings function as a living archive. Memory in the Sahara does not rely heavily on documents. Paper does not survive well, and written records are less central than oral accounts or visual continuity. In this context, makeup becomes a stable and durable method of carrying history across generations. A marking does not fade from cultural awareness simply because a person passes away. It reappears on the faces of descendants, keeping lineage present in daily life. This continuity reassures families that they remain connected, even when circumstances force them to move or adapt. The pigments used for ancestral markings are chosen carefully. Families select the same types of earth ash or plant material used by their ancestors. Even when other materials become available, they avoid altering the mixture. Consistency of color and texture helps maintain the authenticity of the marking. If the shade changes too much, the meaning may shift, or the connection to the past may weaken. Women therefore remain cautious about substitutions. Familiarity with the materials becomes part of the tradition itself. Preparation often occurs in groups. Women gather to mix pigments for special occasions, reviewing the steps that ensure the markings remain faithful to past practices. They compare texture, debate subtle differences, and check for uniformity. This shared responsibility reinforces the idea that ancestral markings do not belong solely to one individual. They belong to the lineage. A marking is not owned by the woman who wears it, but guarded by the family that maintains it. When a marking is applied for a significant life event, it carries even more meaning. During ceremonies involving marriage, childbirth, or seasonal gatherings, families emphasize markings that reflect important transitions. These markings are worn with seriousness, not as embellishment, but as declarations of identity. A woman preparing for such a ceremony stands still as the pigment is applied with deliberate care. Each movement traces a line through both skin and memory. Observers note the resemblance to markings worn by earlier women, recognizing the continuity. The value of these markings becomes clear during travel. If a family moves temporarily to a different region, their markings inform others of their origin. This helps establish trust, or at least recognition. People do not need to ask about lineage, they see it immediately. The markings reduce misunderstanding in interactions and reinforce stable expectations. In places where movement across the desert is common, such clarity helps maintain safety and social coherence. Younger women sometimes wonder whether they should adapt their markings out of curiosity or preference, but they rarely do so. The weight of memory influences their decisions. They feel responsibility not only to themselves but to those who came before them. Changing a marking would feel like breaking a link, and the benefit of novelty does not outweigh the stability offered by tradition. The desert's consistency reinforces this mindset. When the landscape remains steady, people find comfort in carrying symbols that remain steady as well. Men in these communities identify ancestral markings easily, though they do not participate in creating them. They understand the significance and treat the markings with respect. Families use them to recall marriages, births, alliances, and events in their collective history. Over time, the markings support a cultural structure that might otherwise weaken under environmental pressures. Foreign observers sometimes describe these markings as decorative or symbolic art. They underestimate the depth of meaning held within each repetition. These are not expressions of creativity or fashion. They are reminders of lives lived, responsibilities passed, and memories preserved despite the desert's harshness. To remove or alter them would be to disrupt the continuity that keeps families rooted in their identity. In everyday life, the markings become so familiar that people hardly notice them. But during moments of reflection or ritual, the awareness returns. A woman sees her mother's face reflected in her own through the markings she wears. She understands that she will pass them onward. The continuity reassures her that her family's story will not disappear, even if other forms of record are lost. These markings reveal how memory survives without written records. Each face carries a visible link to those who lived before. Another understanding emerges when considering how some women quietly alter markings to express defiance or independence. Deviation from tradition in the Sahara does not happen loudly. It appears in small decisions, quiet adjustments, and slight alterations that seem insignificant to outsiders but carry substantial meaning within the community. A woman choosing a different pigment, modifying a familiar line, or shifting the placement of a marking signals more than a desire for variety. Such changes communicate resistance, independence, or dissatisfaction with established expectations. Because markings carry memory and identity, altering them challenges the continuity that families rely upon. These shifts occur rarely, yet when they appear, they draw careful attention. Some young women experiment with pigment colors not approved for their stage of life. A girl who chooses a lighter or darker shade than the one traditionally associated with her lineage creates an immediate contrast. Her decision cannot be dismissed as a stylistic curiosity. In a place where consistency defines the relationship between individuals and their families, deviation becomes a form of refusal. She signals that she does not accept the strict boundaries placed upon her. Other women recognize the difference quickly, though responses vary. Some remain silent, understanding that resistance often begins in small gestures. Others warn her gently, reminding her of the weight these markings carry. There are also patterns historically prohibited in certain communities. These patterns may have belonged to rival groups, may have represented specific statuses, or may have been tied to events that the community wishes to forget. When a woman chooses to wear one of these forbidden patterns, even in altered form, she creates tension. People understand that the markings were abandoned for a reason. Restoring them introduces questions about loyalty, identity, and intention. A single line added to a cheek or forehead communicates a willingness to break from communal memory. The reasons for defiance differ among individuals. Some young women feel restricted by expectations. They inherit markings before they fully understand their meanings, and the pressure to maintain them becomes a burden. For others, resistance becomes a way to assert individuality in environments that value collective identity. A woman may choose a color associated with another region, or modify the thickness of a line to express her preference. These decisions appear minor in isolation, but collectively, they push against boundaries maintained for generations. Families respond to these changes with caution rather than anger. They understand that resistance often stems from emotional or personal tension. A woman altering her markings may be expressing frustration about her social role, marriage expectations, or limitations placed upon her behavior. The markings become a language through which she communicates discomfort. Older women may attempt to guide her back toward traditional forms, offering advice or recounting stories that explain why markings must remain consistent. Their responses aim to restore continuity without confronting her directly. Communities that rely on markings to signal social roles view defiance as a potential disruption. If markings lose their reliability, the clarity that guides social interactions weakens. A woman wearing the wrong set of markings may be mistaken for someone entering a different life stage. Misinterpretations can confuse, especially during rituals or gatherings where markings determine behavior. For this reason, communities monitor changes closely. They do not prohibit variation entirely, but make it clear that deviation carries consequences for social coherence. Despite these pressures, some women persist in their choices. They maintain altered markings for extended periods, allowing them to become part of their public identity. These women often become subjects of quiet discussion. People wonder whether they intend to redefine their family's lineage or whether their decisions reflect deeper issues. The community may eventually accept their new markings after enough time passes, but the acceptance is not immediate. It requires careful consideration, and often hinges on whether the change affects the meaning attached to the marking. Sometimes, defiance spreads among younger women, creating temporary waves of alteration. A group may collectively choose a different pigment or modify traditional lines to express unity in their resistance. These movements do not last long, as older women intervene gently to remind them of the structure that tradition provides. Yet the brief period of variation demonstrates the potential for shared dissatisfaction. The markings become a mirror of generational tension. The environment itself reinforces the visibility of these changes. The desert leaves little room for anonymity. People observe one another closely out of necessity, and any shift in appearance is noticed. A woman wearing altered markings cannot remain unnoticed. Her resistance becomes public simply because the markings remain on her face in plain view. This visibility intensifies the impact of her decision. In some communities, resistance through markings leads to informal conversations among elders. They may discuss whether the tradition should adapt or whether the individual should be encouraged to return to established forms. Such discussions highlight the delicate balance between continuity and change. Traditions persist because they provide stability, but they must also make room for personal expression without collapsing under its weight. Defiance does not always represent rebellion against the community. Sometimes it signals a shift in how a woman understands herself. She may use markings to communicate a desire for greater independence, or a change in how she wishes to participate in communal life. These messages, though subtle, are visible to those who know how to interpret the patterns. Rituals make resistance more pronounced. If a woman arrives at a ceremony wearing markings not appropriate for the occasion, the disruption becomes immediate. People react silently but unmistakably. The contrast between her markings and those of others highlights the tension. Women responsible for applying ceremonial markings may refuse to assist her until she returns to accepted forms. The pressure to conform intensifies during these moments, yet some women persist. Over time, certain acts of defiance become part of family stories. A grandmother may recount the time she wore markings forbidden during her youth, explaining what motivated her and how the community reacted. These stories remind younger generations that resistance has long been part of life in the desert, even when tradition dominates. They also show that defiance, when handled with care, does not destroy identity, but adds complexity to it. These small alterations reveal how personal expression challenges communal continuity. Each deviation reflects tension between individual desire and inherited expectation. Something further becomes clear when noticing how the skin serves as the surface that carries these shifting meanings. They approach the skin with a kind of deliberate calm, treating it not as a simple surface, but as an extended record that has followed each woman through heat, dust, and the slow passing of years. The desert shapes how they understand the body, and the skin becomes the most stable place where meaning can be held without being erased too quickly by wind or shifting sand. Every gesture prepares that surface carefully, acknowledging how long it must endure under harsh light and dry winds that touch it all day without pause. In this environment, the skin is never empty. It always carries traces of labor, climate memory, and the stories that have already settled there long before any color is added. They work slowly because accuracy matters. They already know the sequence of marks they will make, learned through repetition from older women who explained the order without requiring spoken rules. The skin's texture guides them, helping them identify where certain lines should sit or how thick a particular shading must be to stay visible for more than a day. Nothing is rushed, because rushing would disturb the balance between personal meaning and community expectation. The process is steady, and the desert silence supports that steadiness. They choose colors based on the way each tone reacts to sunlight. Certain reds deepen during the hotter parts of the afternoon, while darker pigments stay sharp across long hours of travel. These choices are not aesthetic preferences, but practical decisions shaped by the environment. The desert decides which colors survive most effectively, and the women adapt to that natural logic. Over time, each layer begins to function like a small archive. The marks do not remain randomly placed. They map identity, memory, and the roles that shift with seasons and responsibilities. They also understand that the skin absorbs meaning gradually. A mark worn during childhood develops into something different once that same person becomes a mother or reaches an age associated with different responsibilities. Even when the pigment fades, the shape of the old line leaves a faint ridge, and that ridge reminds others of what the woman once carried. In this sense, the skin extends beyond ornamentation. It becomes a place where history is stored in visual form open to interpretation by those who understand the community's shared language of signs. The surface can hold several generations of significance at the same time, allowing old and new layers to coexist. When they apply the pigments, they focus not only on visual clarity, but on the continuity of inherited stories. The marks that appear on the forehead may refer to a grandmother's migration across regions. The shapes near the eyes can represent personal choices about belonging or separation. Each woman uses her skin to explain where she comes from and where she intends to stand within the social structure of her group. Even without speaking, these arrangements are understood by others who share the same cultural frame. The marks communicate intentions, histories, and relationships that do not require spoken explanation. As the desert changes tone from morning to evening, the marks shift subtly with the light. Some appear sharper when the sun is low, while others blend softly during the late afternoon. These small transitions do not reduce their meaning. Rather, they reinforce how the desert itself participates in shaping how a woman is seen. The environment becomes part of the language of the skin, heat, shadow, and wind, each contributing to how the message is read by anyone who looks closely. The women maintain these marks with a sense of care that matches their respect for the histories involved. When a line begins to blur after several days of travel, they reinforce it during quiet moments at night. They do not remove older marks quickly, allowing each sign to remain long enough for its meaning to be recognized by the community. Over time, the skin becomes less about isolated symbols and more about the continuity of an evolving narrative. It grows into a surface that never stops receiving new meaning. These stories remain unspoken, but they are not hidden. A woman may walk silently through the desert, but anyone who sees her can understand aspects of her lineage, her responsibilities, or the stage of life she is currently experiencing. This unspoken communication forms a stable network among women, linking them through a shared system of visual knowledge. Each mark becomes a small declaration of identity and memory, meant to be read by those who understand the codes passed down through generations. Even when the pigment fades completely, the memory of the design stays with the woman who wore it. She knows which marks once rested on her skin and why they mattered. This enduring awareness is another form of storytelling. The skin becomes a place where personal and collective memory blend, and the act of marking it becomes a consistent reminder of belonging. In this way, the skin remains an active landscape, even when no color is visible. It keeps holding meaning that does not depend on constant retouching. The desert does not preserve many physical objects for long, but the skin endures as one of the few reliable surfaces for carrying cultural memory. The women understand this intuitively. Their approach is steady, patient, and centered on continuity. The marks they create act as a bridge between past and present, ensuring that knowledge does not disappear in the shifting sand. These layers of meaning show how the skin carries stories with a quiet persistence. Each design deepens the connection between personal identity and communal history. Something more becomes visible as the lines reveal how memory can survive through the simplest marks. You have reached the end of this long, quiet journey through the desert, where beauty has never been a matter of fashion, convenience, or imitation, but something far deeper and more persistent than any product or trend could ever define. As the last traces of sunlight fade across the dunes, the women of the Sahara continue to carry their colors with the same calm determination they have carried for generations. And it becomes clear that what rests on their skin is not simply decoration. It is a form of remembrance, a practice shaped by survival, community, and the steady movement of time across the human face. In this moment, as the wind softens and the temperature drops, their makeup begins to reveal its true meaning, not as something applied, but as something inherited. The desert does not offer much protection, yet these women have learned to create it with their own hands. Their colors are chosen for purpose, applied with intention, and kept alive through repetition that stretches back far beyond living memory. They do not paint themselves for vanity, nor do they attempt to follow any distant beauty trends that come and go in the outside world. Their colors remain steady in the way the desert stays unchanged over centuries, steady in the way heritage stays rooted, even as generations shift. What they place on their skin is not meant to impress. It is meant to anchor them to the people who came before and to those who will follow. Beauty here is not separation. It is a connection. When a woman marks her face, she is not thinking first about how she appears alone, but about how she appears within her community. Her lines speak a language she did not invent, but one she learned through living, watching, listening, and participating. These marks exist for the elders who recognize the patterns, for the children who will one day carry them. And for the desert itself, which reads the boldness of these shapes against the brightness of its own sunlight. In the stillness of dusk, when the heat begins to recede, the meaning of these marks becomes clearer. Identity does not depend on being seen by the world, only by the people who share your story. Even the way they prepare for these markings reflects a kind of devotion that is rarely found in modern life, where appearance so often becomes fragmented, disconnected from history or belonging. In the Sahara, the act of painting the skin demands presence. It requires patience, the slowing of breath, and a quiet respect for the rituals that surround it. These rituals do not rely on mirrors or artificial tools. Their importance lies in the act itself, in the gathering of women who know how to interpret each other's movements, in the acknowledgement that the body is not merely a surface, but a vessel for collective memory. Through their calm repetition, through their willingness to let the desert shape the form of their beauty, they maintain a kind of harmony that extends far beyond the visible. To stand in the presence of these traditions is to understand that makeup, as it is known elsewhere, is only a small shadow of what beauty can be when it carries responsibility. The women of the Sahara remind us that appearance is not a performance, nor is it a competition. It is a declaration of endurance, of roots, of connection. Their faces are not blank canvases waiting to be transformed. They are landscapes filled with history. Each mark says, I come from somewhere. I belong to someone. I am part of a story larger than myself. And so it feels fitting that this exploration concludes not with spectacle, but with a quiet moment, much like the quiet moments the desert gives to those who listen to it. The night approaches slowly, the air becoming cooler, and the wind settling into a gentle breeze that brushes across the dunes. The women close their eyes for a brief second, letting the day release its weight from their shoulders. In that pause, their colours remain steady. Nothing needs to be adjusted or corrected, because what they carry is not meant to be flawless. It is meant to endure. As you prepare to rest, let the simplicity of their rituals follow you into the stillness of your own night. Imagine their slow movements, their careful lines, the patience in their hands. Imagine how their beauty does not demand attention but quietly asserts existence. Nothing about their traditions is rushed, and nothing is done for approval. Everything holds purpose. Everything remains grounded. It is a reminder that identity is not something we perform, but something we preserve. Let this closing moment be gentle. Let it bring you the same calm that settles over the desert after sunset. The world becomes softer, quieter, and the noise of the day begins to fade behind you. You do not need to hold anything tightly now. You can let your thoughts loosen, let your breath slow, and let your body become still. If there is one message carried across these dunes, it is this: beauty can be a form of survival, a way of saying, I am here, even when the world around you shifts sharply and without warning. It can be the thread that connects you to others, the mark that continues your story long after the day has ended. And just as the women of the Sahara preserve their identities through every line they draw, you too carry pieces of your own history, quiet and steady, waiting to be remembered. So let the desert night settle around you now. Let the silence rest softly on your thoughts. Let the stories of endurance linger, but without weight. Everything you have learned here can stay with you without asking for anything more. You can close your eyes, knowing that the world continues in its slow, steady rhythm, and that beauty, real beauty, remains where meaning remains. Good night. May your rest be gentle, and may the calm of the Sahara follow you into your dreams. May the quiet strength of its women stay with you as you drift into sleep, steady and unbroken, carried softly by the night.